Chapter 5 Season 2 is a season that I believe a lot of people like the concept of due to the Greek mythology theme it utilizes. However, the overall execution of the season just falls short. I think many people get wrapped up in the unique aspects of a season and attribute its success to the more mundane or smaller parts of a season that they consider to be highlights. But the things that get overlooked with this perspective that some carry ultimately play a larger role into the overall direction of a season. Naturally, you're not wrong for finding these smaller aspects or the season as a whole to be enjoyable, but you need to understand when it comes down to the three main categories that I base my season reviews off of, it widens the critical lens for approaching these seasons. The three main categories being the map, the loot pool, and overall content / quality of life changes. Despite the praise this season has received for its choice with the unique theme, the content surrounding it is rather lazy, and suffers from many issues, even some that persist from the prior season. The main issues I found with this season stem from its loot pool. Like I said at the beginning of the video, many people get caught up in the somewhat flagship items of a season, and to some extent I understand why. These items are flashy, they make for a good trailer presentation, but most importantly, they're unique. They're likely the very first thing you think of when the loot pool for a Greek mythology season comes to mind. However, despite their attention-grabbing nature, they don't contribute much to the overall weight of a loot pool. Most players this season won't be seen running any of these new items at all, and there are a plethora of reasons for this. The Zeus Lightning Bolt for the most part is balanced. It does 80 damage on direct hit, 40 on splash, with 3 shots in one use. This might sound a bit powerful, but considering how long it takes to complete a single use, it creates a high risk, high reward situation. The Wings of Icarus have 300 health worth of durability that allows you to fly around for a pretty significant amount of time. The major trade-offs to this are the extended hitbox that your player features when flying around, and the speed not being up to par with other rotational items. The Chains of Hades in certain situations are admittedly broken, especially when using them to pressure someone's wall.
Fuck you.
They were really the only Greek mythology item that I took issue with this season. Now, you might be wondering, how would this impact players from not running these items throughout the season? Well, it's also important to mention that the spawn rate of these Greek mythology items was rather low. Not to mention, a good few weeks of the season didn't feature them at all, in an effort to promote the new mythics that came with the Avatar update. In addition to this, there were just many weapons that outweighed the necessity to run Greek mythology items. Ultimately, by the time they returned, people had lost interest in running them. But even if you want to pretend that the Greek mythology items were more important than they were, nothing is more important to a season's loot pool than the shotgun meta. The shotguns this season, and more or less throughout the chapter, haven't been great. The Gatekeeper shotgun can best be described as rather awkward to use. Fortnite is no stranger to awkward shotguns. Over the past few years, many of the stinker seasons they have dropped have been in part dragged down as a result of shotguns that are rather unpleasant to use. Some good examples of this are the Prime shotgun and the Ranger shotgun. In order to do consistent damage with the Prime, the shotgun had to be fully reloaded, making it incredibly obnoxious to use in fights. The Ranger, however, is arguably worse because this weapon, instead of having 4 shots where the first one was the only one that would function as a genuine shotgun blast, it had only 1 shot in the mag. Now, despite the gimmicky nature that these two weapons present, the Gatekeeper isn't as bad. Similar to how getting hit by a car isn't technically as bad as having every limb torn from your body. I really don't understand why this weapon was given 3 shots. Sure, if it had a slower fire rate and more damage, I could understand the decision a bit more, but giving a weapon that shoots faster than the tac shotgun 3 shells in a mag that has to be fully reloaded at once is brain dead. It's very telling that many players would run the gold version of this weapon over the mythic because it came with the option of modding it with a drum magazine. The sad thing is this was the good shotgun this season, as after the subsequent nerfs to the Frenzy Auto and the lack of change that the Hammer Pump received, it reigned supreme as there was practically no reason for running anything else. The rest of the loot pool I found to be overall less offensive but not great. The new weapons that were added at the beginning of the season didn't change the overall direction of the meta from last season. It's not that these weapons are necessarily bad, in fact, they overall seem balanced. However, there's no real reason to run them over the pre-existing options as they're just indisputably worse. Now, something I found surprising was the re-implementation of older weapons, if you can call them that. The drum gun was the first one to return this season, except this time it's projectile based.
But why? Why would you do that? Why would you do any of that?
Honestly, I don't really see the point of going through the effort of remodeling and reworking this weapon to fit within the new standards for these weapons. Not only has this weapon been a dumpster fire for a while now, but it also doesn't do anything to further the loot pool. It's just another one of those weapons that doesn't get used outside of a handful of times due to its lack of utility. The next returning weapon was the Deagle, except this time it's projectile based, because, you know, everything else is, so this has to be as well, and shut up, it makes sense. The Deagle's pool's main utility came from the fact that it dealt hefty amounts of damage at range while being hit scan, unlike a sniper. And now it's projectile based, which just means you're using a lower damage sniper. Good job, Epic. It's unfortunate because this lazy approach of tacking on the projectile based feature to every new weapon they add just lacks any real nuance in the loot pool, and I think it turns a lot of people off to the idea of projectile based weapons as a whole. Now look, these first two additions might have been bad. They really only served the purpose of pumping the game with new content, if you can even call it that, but Epic was sure to deliver with the last one, right? Well, they added back the TAC AR, which wasn't a great start considering this weapon shoots Nerf darts, except this time. Honestly, if they were going to make any weapon non-projectile based, I thought it could be this one considering its lower damage at range, giving it a sense of trade-off, but nope, they decided to make an already terrible weapon even worse. The problem with really all of these new items is you're not going to run them outside of a handful of times. You might pick it up at the beginning of the season because it piqued your interest, but past the initial dopamine spike of using the new weapon or item, your interest just dies down. And I feel like a lot of this contributes to this quote-unquote recession in content we've been having, because a lot of people clearly show a lack of interest in running these newer items, and as the season progresses, it just feels like a slightly altered version of the prior one, with the same metas and tropes because the new weapons and items really only serve the purpose of muddying up the loot pool. Their meager addition is so small that you will likely run other weapons at a lower rarity over them, simply because they lack any utility by comparison. Something that Clark Clint said in a video discussing Season OG was how despite the simplicity that the old weapon pools featured, they still had a lot of complexity because they offered differing playstyles, and I completely agree. Sure, the current weapons are moddable. They feature bullet drop with a realistic and complex feel that other chapters don't offer. But the problem is they struggle to have any trade-off value or alteration in playstyle. You pick up a weapon not because it's your preference or fits your playstyle, but rather because it's unequivocally better. And that makes for an objectively shitty loot pool.
This is the worst!
I feel I have to constantly reiterate this, but Epic almost always delivers with their maps, and since I heavily poo-pooed all over the problems with the loot pool, I figured it would be important to give this season credit where it's due. Now, despite the fact that I believe Epic is more than capable of delivering with their new locations, there are a few tropes that can often plague their newer maps, that being the layout, the resources, and the building grid. Now, by far, the one that I had the most concerns with going into this season was the building grid. For whatever reason, Epic makes certain arches, half walls, or other random structures completely negate the building mechanic. As a result, it's significantly easier to get yourself caught in a situation where you need to build and can't because of a lack of playtesting through Epic's end. The good thing is this season, despite having many arches, pillars, and random objects that are usually plagued with these issues, doesn't present any major problems on this front. I was able to find a few places where I couldn't build, but these small spots in these locations don't affect my perception of these POIs nearly as negatively as, for example, this masterpiece. Resources don't seem to be much of an issue either, as pretty much every new location features enough trees or objects that offer enough materials to support in fights. Again, with layout, I really don't take issue with any of these new locations. It's worth mentioning that I was worried about Mount Olympus specifically, because from what I understand, many Greek structures similar to the ones that Mount Olympus is trying to emulate are just incredibly open on the inside, making it difficult to support more rooms, but they managed to put together something that works similar to most strong locations, just with a Greek aesthetic. I've heard an argument crop up critiquing these locations solely off the basis of where they're placed on the map, and I think it's a bit silly. Essentially, the main argument is that because these new locations and their respective biomes were placed on the corners of the island, it detracts from the overall theme and feel of the season being Greek mythology, as the rest of the map remains consistent with the prior season. Now, this argument might sound good at first, but as soon as you take a stroll down memory lane, you'll realize how ultimately flawed this idea is. Chapter 2 met this criteria for affecting the center of the map quite well, so much so to the point that by the time Season 8 came around, almost every POI from Season 1 of the chapter had remained unchanged. Again, I think this idea is ultimately coming from a good faith position, but if the past shows us anything, it's that changing the center of the map from season to season results in a lack of evolution and an unhappy community to accompany it. I don't think there's anything innately wrong with changing the center of the island, but if you're going to, it shouldn't change much past that point. Plus, considering Epic usually likes to make their major events towards the center of the map, it would ultimately make more sense to save that change associated with it for a later season. Hopefully by this point you understand that I think Epic implemented their map changes quite well, even if the supporting loot pool was rather stenchy. I don't like medallions.
I hate
so much about the things that you choose to be.
They create a plethora of issues for gameplay, balancing, and the map, essentially giving a set of POIs on the map an item that gives you a significant advantage over other players, detracts significantly from other locations in terms of landability. Removing locations medallions and giving them to new ones automatically makes those POIs significantly worse, and creates a main focus for most of the players to land new ones while leaving the old ones by the wayside. It's unfortunate because a big reason for me to land a location like Snooty was the medallion and weapon associated with it, and like I said last season, the moment it gets removed, it becomes significantly worse. However, the medallion system last season had some positives, mainly in the fact that each medallion gave the same augmentations of replenishing your shield over time. But with this season, I guess they couldn't help themselves, and decided it would be way better to have only one strong medallion. The Cerberus medallion grants a dash mechanic that recharges over time. The only other way of acquiring this broken mechanic is by bathing yourself in the green piss lake surrounding the underworld biome. Instead of having a preference-based system where you can land Mount Olympus if it's more your location, or the underworld if you like green piss, you instead have to land Grim Gate if you want the best medallion, which is just sad. Something I found to be unexpected was the Floor's Lava return this season. This is by far one of my favorite LTMs, and it's honestly unfortunate that we had to wait such a long time for it to return. LTMs have always offered a bit of an escapism from the core playlist, while not deviating too far from it. This could serve as a wake-up call for Epic to reboot some of their old LTMs, but given how hellbent they are on promoting creative in their other half-baked modes, this is unlikely, as LTMs would likely just detract from them. Chapter 5 Season 2, while unique, in many ways clearly presents many lazy issues with the loot pool. It's not the most egregious loot pool when compared to other seasons, but it creates enough issues that I think a lot of people subconsciously recognize, and as a result, you will find many players displeased with the current state of the game, even if they won't admit or recognize its unpleasant loot pool. I'm aware there are many people who found this season to be amazing, and if that's you, more power to you. Ultimately, I try to do my best to keep my standards consistent with these season reviews. I don't want to lie and tell you that I actually thought this season was really good just because the main populace accepts it as such. I'm definitely not a shill for the game, but I'm also not attempting some kind of impression farm like many have accused me of. These are just the conclusions I came to when I played the season, compared it to others, and ultimately talked about it from a more critical perspective. That being said, I would give this season a solid 5.8 out of 10. Not great, but certainly better than last season, if even only slightly. If you don't agree, which I'm sure most of you don't, I would love to hear your perspective down in the comments below. Check out my other season reviews or content if you like this video, and consider subscribing. Anyways, thank you for watching and have a great day.